Hello, everyone. Today we have Annie Empira from oneempira.com. How you doing today, Annie?
I'm good. Good.
Not used to hearing me sound so professional. Okay. Anyways, I gotta say, okay. How you doing? We're Jimmy. You take it away. Like I'd say, Jimmy, take it away.
Okay, welcome everyone. Annie, it's great to have you with us. If you would like to just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your history, what you've done, how you got here. That would be great to hear.
Sure. So I'm Annie Emprima Martin, Annie Emprima, more formally, and I deployed in 2016. That's sort of the catalyst, the beginning of this story of how I came to be doing what I'm doing. Is deployed, land in Kuwait, weird things start happening. I'm claircognizance turns on, clairsentience turns on, clair cognizance, and I'm having this experience all while being a section chief for finance for a support operations branch of a brigade in helping fight the war on terrorism. I've got these internal things happening while we've got very serious things happening in my 15-meter view. So as those things continue to develop while I was deployed, I couldn't share that with anyone. It's not like I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm hearing voices. That's not what you do while you're deployed. So kept it to myself, sort of internalized what was happening without any real support system. And I remember thinking, I wish I knew someone that could help me untangle this without it making it seem like I was stepping myself into psychosis. And so that stayed in the back of my mind. And I came home to at the time, an ex-husband that was very dissociated. He wasn't home to even see how injured I came back. I came back with PTSD, physical injuries, my knees, my ankles, and all of the turmoil that comes with just deploying. So ask for the divorce, and voices start getting a little bit stronger, and it gets stronger and it gets stronger. And fast forward about 5 months from that coming back from deployment, I tripped over my own feet. And I was like carrying the weight of the world as business owner, veteran in the military, mother, wife, friend, and I had no resources left within me. My cell phone battery sort of died. And I tripped over my own feet because my body was just exhausted. My mind was exhausted. My spirituality was exhausted. Everything was at zero on the battery level. And I just, start crying, and this voice comes in, this voice, like really clear voice. And I had not had that clear audience before. And it came in from the side of my right side of my head. And it was very loud, very clear. We've been waiting for you to let go. And at that moment, I realized I was so caught up in traumas. I was so caught up in these like false beliefs that, like it just set me on this path to understanding the impact of emotions on the mind, body, and spirit. And so since then, since very early 2017, this has been my full-time dedication in studying the metaphysical side and also the psychological side of human suffering and human flourishing.
Now, where do you see your? Go ahead, Jimmy.
No, sorry, you go, brother. Fine.
Where do you see yourself? This interesting question. Like in 5 years with what you're doing.
What I'd like to do is bring metaphysics, which if we look at the definition at the very core, is the meta of physics, is what happens after the physics, what happens after the parts that we can measure. What is the not yet measurable pieces? I want to bridge more of the unknown to the known, bring it back to neuroscience, bring it back to epigenetics, bring it back to psychology to explain how our mind, body, and spirit operate as an energy system, not a physical body with components within. So 5 years from now, I will be still marching forward in being a subject matter expert on the impact of emotions on the mind and the body.
Did you enjoy your time in the military?
Oh, it's a love-hate relationship. Because without the military, I wouldn't be where I am right now. That was a massive catalyst. So for that, I'm grateful. But quite a bit of my lessons in patriarchy, trauma, and misogyny came from the military.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it
I imagine
sounds
it's a bit like TikTok, because TikTok's kind of like a love-hate relationship too.
Yeah. I'm not, if it was left up to me, I would not be on social media at all. But TikTok has been my big source of exposure
Yeah.
and clients. 95% of my clients come from TikTok.
Yeah. I seen a big migration starting to happen. I know it's a little bit off subject, but I tend to do this. And I don't know. I mentioned to you on the phone Rumble and stuff like this. I feel like there's going to be a lot of people migrating to other places with what may be happening. I'm not getting into the ban and stuff like that, but I so many people are looking for information. And I've seen this on so many different apps, and there's so many teachers, and you're one of those teachers that, can actually connect people. And not talking down to any other spiritual workers, but I've noticed that there are a lot of people that can literally get a Reiki certificate, and they can get on camera and they look good and they can do whatever, and then they can just teach. So it's like, yeah, as a master. I mean, even with myself, I had mentors and teacher that was in 26,000 year lineage of Mayan shamanism. So like I had all these steps I had to go through for years before I ever put myself out there,
And I don't even know if I'm going to hit master in my lifetime. What I am looking at, I can march myself towards something, but it's not the destination. I could study what I'm doing for 40 years and still not really understand it in its fullest capacity.
Yeah. Every teacher that I've ever encountered has told me one thing. Somewhere in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they were like, you will never stop healing yourself. You will never stop. Everywhere you go, you're going to be healing yourself. Like there is no master status to this.
Yeah.
There's no end game.
It's a continuous evolution. We are always evolving. Even else beyond this lifetime, we continue evolving. We are always evolving.
Yeah. And I noticed, would you say that, or you said about PTSD, and so you took on or experienced a lot of trauma, I guess, in the military. Would you say that the trauma that you received was also a factor, a figure, a catalyst towards your transformation?
Oh yeah. Yeah. When I came back, when I say that my emotional, mental, physical, spiritual batteries were drained, there was nothing left in me. So it's like everything got wiped down, and I had to restart, reboot. When I look at PTSD, it was my journey in understanding the mind. And then when I looked at my physical injuries, it was physical injuries, and my knees, my ankles, fibromyalgia, my nervous system was shot. But it was childhood trauma on top of marital trauma on top of military trauma, and it became very complex. I had to unravel and untangle all of it. And in untangling it, that voice came back and said, this isn't for you to keep. It's for you to understand how to unravel. You have to understand how to undo this. And what that did was it taught me and showed me how to help my clients unravel their traumas, unbundle it so that they can have a cleaner journey, a lighter journey going forward.
Because that seems to be a common theme amongst some of the people that we've had on so far in the 20 odd episodes that we've done, is that they all experienced a trauma. They're either at their wits' end, they're at, that they want, that they've had enough, shall we say. Obviously yours was purely just all the trauma just overlaid on top of each other, and it seems like when we get to that stage where we either either don't want to carry on, or we have lots of trauma, then it's when our so-called gifts, our clairs and everything, that they come online to help us. And a friend pointed this out to me, and I hadn't really noticed it before, though when looking back I can see how obvious it is. Said that we all want gifts. Everyone wants gifts, at clairaudience, claircognizance and stuff like that, but it seems to be that trauma is the one that opens them. And so by wanting gifts, we actually want trauma, because that seems to be the
we shouldn't be seeking trauma, but trauma, when we understand the brain and the neuroanatomy, certain things, it's a overproduction of brain activity, and that becomes the catalyst. But that doesn't mean it isn't already there. It's just the trauma exacerbated it or sped up the process to get the person there. Because we have people that are incredibly gifted and have never experienced complex trauma or any type of big T trauma, and they have these beautiful gifts. But for those that experienced the trauma, it was the trauma that shoved or pushed the brain activity to hit the mark, to turn the switch on.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that people
yeah.
seek it out, although they might do on a subconscious level, because obviously there are things going on in there that we maybe fully don't understand. And I guess when you see kids, up to whatever age, maybe 2, 3 or whatever, they're incredibly open. They have all of the gifts, and they haven't. Maybe they have experienced lots of trauma in their past lives, if you believe in reincarnation and everything, but they don't seem to have had enough time to incur or experience loads and loads of trauma to open those gifts, because they're born with them innately. So, but then at the same time, I was saying that there seems to be a theme about trauma also sort of reopening those gifts, shall we say. That may not be the sole reason for them. I just thought it was interesting how that when a friend pointed it out to me, I thought it was a different perspective that I hadn't considered before, and I thought it was quite interesting.
I want to caveat on this and add a little bit is how we're talking about trauma being a catalyst to initiate clairs or gifts. If trauma is the catalyst, then we also have to put trauma as a priority of healing. So if the doors got the doors got pushed wide open to bring those gifts in, we also have to have the responsibility of closing those doors back up and closing our energy field so that we have better boundaries, energetic boundaries, and that what we're doing in the energy field or with our gifts is coming through in what I call a clean straw, that we clean our straw so that our dirty straw isn't being shared with the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I see what you mean. That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, I know for myself, and I've seen some other workers too. I mean, maybe it's the older generation, but the trauma does open up certain things, but whatever that may be. But I wonder what differentiates a person that maybe says shuts down into their trauma and one that rises above their trauma. What do you feel about that?
I think it can be, I think trauma can be so heavy that it weighs too much on the person's ability to rise up. And depending on how many adverse childhood experiences someone has. So did they experience their mother being beaten? Did a parent or a caregiver go to prison? Was there a lot of turmoil in the household? Was there poverty? Those adverse childhood experiences early on play a big role in that mathematical algorithm of outcome. So, and also the grittiness. The grittiness comes from having to force through something. And if children weren't given those opportunities to have to bloom like a lotus through some really heavy muddy things, they don't ever build that grittiness to be able to do it as adults. So it just becomes really heavy and they don't know how to take the blanket off.
I found with the subconscious mind. So I've studied a lot of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the subconscious runs about 91 to 90% of how we think. And it seems to be locked in around the age of 7. Of course, things can happen later in life, which can affect the subconscious. And I don't feel like this is taught enough. I feel like it's one of the major keys in spirituality, just in life in general, whether that's Joseph Murphy or Neville Goddard or any of these people. But what I find, though, is that it's something that people really are not looking at. It can hold so many traumatic things. It can hold so many keys to someone's awakening or salvation of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it kind of leads me into the whole other aspect that I mentioned earlier. So you have different psychology teachers out there. You have Freud, you have Carl Jung. There's all these different ones. But when you approach psychology, do you take from different teachers, or do you lean towards one or another?
Right now, my two biggest influencers would be Martin Seligman, who is one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, which came about 25 years ago, and Bessel van der Kolk, who is the author of The Body Keeps the Score, because he's incorporating more of the biofeedback and the more modern psychotherapeutic modalities. So I look at the two of them, and interestingly enough, I met Bessel about a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago. We were standing from each other.
How did you find him? Did you was it a good experience?
He's brilliant, but he's brilliant in data, not emotions. So if I were to look at emotions, I would probably go to Brené Brown, like, tell me about vulnerability and shame. That's not Bessel. Bessel's like, give me the data, give me the research. I want to be known as a scientist, which is kind of interesting considering he's got such a successful book on trauma. But we all have our place in psychology.
Yes, indeed. Brandy, hey Brandy, says, what about the role age plays? I'm not sure in what context, but do you find that there's any noticeable traits in age where someone has maybe trauma at a certain age and it affects them either more or less than someone who had trauma at a later age, for example?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, I want to split the question into age for spiritual awakening and then age for trauma.
Yeah, of course.
Most of the time, trauma in the younger ages, like 8 years and younger, has much more significant negative impact on the thriving of into adulthood. So trauma, when it comes to trauma, the higher the score of childhood trauma, the much harder it is to climb out and to go into a thriving state. When we look at spiritual awakening, just like we have each of the developmental stages, we have the younger adolescent, the pre-adolescent, adolescent, and then you have your young adult. As we go in, when people are having their spiritual awakening midpoint or beyond, they're coming in with seasoned awareness of interpersonal skills. In like very simple terms, if you have a spiritual awakening at 65, you're going to be a lot slower at coming forward. You're not going to have as much freedom in speed to come forward and tell a public audience that you have these gifts. So I find that the older clients that are stepping into their gifts are coming in with the wisdom of stepping back and being more of the elder role, taking the elder role, where as if someone having a spiritual awakening in their early 20s is, they have the freedom to just blast it on social media and say, oh, I've got this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be a practitioner now. My 60-year-old clients don't do that. They step back. They want to understand more of how this is going to impact the culture. How does this impact their family? There's what I'll call the wise pause in spiritual awakening when we're older, and we don't have that wise pause when we're younger. We want to quickly go out and do a whole bunch of things and get some titles. The 60-year-olds don't do that. So there's but that's the same as if there's some drama brewing somewhere. At 20, we might engage in the drama. At 60, we don't engage in the drama, or I hope we don't engage in the drama, because we've gone through life enough to know that the drama doesn't get us very far.
So the 20-year-olds want all the certificates, whereas the 60-year-olds are not too worried about all of the paraphernalia.
It's a very different approach. It's a much slower, strategic approach, but also they're also looking at maybe one or two generations below them, their children, their grandchildren. How does it affect their entire family? Whereas when we're 20, we don't think about how is this going to affect all of my family. It's more of the prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet. So it's like, when I was 20, I was thinking about what do I need? When you're 60, it's what do we need? There's a collective approach to it.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Cool.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So, interesting question. Like the state of the world, I'm not getting into that, but how do you feel like, this is what my guides are telling me to say. So, how do you feel like that's affecting people on a psychological or a spiritual level right now?
I think media bombards us with a certain agenda. And when we are exposed to that agenda, whether we think we're buying into it or not, the frequency of that exposure sways us in a direction. And so if we are out of the golden ratio of 5-1, that five positive things for a negative thing, whether it's in relationships or it's in community, country, state of affairs. If we're constantly bombarded with negative things, it's really hard for us to appreciate and have gratitude for the minority exposure of positive things. We need to have 5 really good things, and that allows us to move through. So I would hope that people are able to step back out of being bombarded with negative things in the world, because we can always find negative things. They're always there. There's been political turmoil since before even America was established. What are we focusing on?
Have you got any tips?
The one thing I find interesting, sorry, Jimmy. One thing I find interesting is, I don't know if you ever researched this, kind of off topic, but the Mongolians. The people think the world's so horrible. Okay. Yeah. I love the Mongolians. I don't love them, but I love their story because I like to say it on camera. Because I'm like, the Mongolians over a 500-year period destroyed a third of the world's population. Because people are like, my life is so horrible. I'm like, dude, you are not living in the time of the Mongolians.
Yeah, you're
like you're okay. Like, you've got electricity, you've got power, you've got things, you got a car. You can't run away from the Mongolians. But they took over, they destroyed the Library of Alexandria, which would be an excellent resource of material, I feel, for us still, if they still have that thing floating around, and these other things, and almost the entire Middle East of that period. That was like the center of science and culture. But I guess what I'm getting at is I think people see the perspective of what they're going through only through the lens of what's happening now, and not through history.
Yeah. We're playing a really important role right now. How we view the world, we have the power to change it, but we have to change it in numbers. If our country in the United States, if we're always feeling like we're being attacked in our community, our neighborhood, our country, if that's what's running through our mind, that's what we're participating in. So if
we're feeding that.
Yeah, we're feeding back what we've been fed. and it just perpetuates it. But if we can look at this and say, we all have something to contribute, like, you know, this is like a kitchen. We're here to talk about the metaphysical stuff. If we can recognize what we have to contribute as our personal gift to bring to humanity, whether it's like, whether it's a connection to earth as the trees and the animals. Mine is not the connection to earth, mine is the connection to people and the emotions. But if we each contribute something, we're now reducing how much is being fed into the negative. We don't have to contribute a lot, we just have to contribute.
Do you feel like we're do you feel like we're still experiencing and sort of releasing, transmuting the effects of, say, the Mongolians, the trauma sort of that was put on from the Mongolians and other events from past? I know it's sort of hard to say really, but how do you view sort of that generational trauma aspect?
I don't think
Like
it goes
epigenetic
back to Mongolians. I think
but I mean, I think what Jimmy means, sorry, Annie, is like, because in epigenetics, like if your great grandfather was bitten by a black widow, then you could carry that fear. So my theory, at least it's my theory, is that you could carry that from so many generations backwards and not even know it. Like something catastrophic happened in your family line or your bloodline or your genetic line, I'm hearing.
Yeah, epigenetics, but I don't know that we can go. Right now, the way science, the technology that we have, can't show us past 20 generations. But I even in my research, we don't really go that far back. After so many generations, it's no longer soft coding. It's no longer in the gene expression. It becomes part of the DNA. If we can go back even 4 or 5 generations, and we can address the terror 4 or 5 generations back, whether it's genocide or survivors of the Holocaust or other attempts to eradicate a subclass, whatever that may be, racial injustice, any social injustice. If we can go back 5 generations and just heal 5 generations to current, that's a significant impact. And what we understand about epigenetics is we can inherit through our father's lineage the memories, his traumas. We can inherit emotions through our mother's lineage, our grandmother being pregnant with our mother, developing the eggs for us through that lineage. So if we just focus 5 generations or 7, like the indigenous, a lot of the native tribes focus on the 7th generation effect. If we go back just 7 generations, that's plenty of work for us to take off the bulk of what we're carrying. We don't have to go back that far. We don't have to go back to time of we don't have to even go back past like maybe the mid 1800s to really clear out what we've been carrying.
So let's have a look. Kimberly says, I'm moving forward through the quantum level and how our children are on a generational level, DNA code strands level of healing or other. I think we just addressed that with regards to healing generational levels and everything. So I think we've done that.
Explain your campus in the black room and the beings that you connect with.
So the black room is like Grand Central Station. It is this center hub, and it's like a Faraday room because it's the energy powering it is my energy. When people go into it, it's a Faraday in the sense of entities or anything that might be scaring them or ancestors that cause a lot of distress. Nothing comes in without invitation. So whatever their higher self, their what I call the intelligence, the mind, body, spirit, future self, oversoul, all of the pieces that make us us. When the intelligence deems something as appropriate, it brings it into the black room. We invite it in, but nothing's in there without permission from some level of us. From the black room, we can go up from fourth dimension, the black room being fourth dimension, up to fifth dimension, which is like a biosphere training campus. So think of this intergalactic college campus for all sorts of species. There are no human teachers there, but there are teachers there to teach humans. So when we go into the campus, if we go into the arena, and the arena is like a big training coliseum. So if someone has a really big energy gift that doesn't really seem so useful here on Earth, but maybe their gift is to help the energy grid of the solar system. You can't really practice that here in your backyard, right? So we go to the arena to practice that. And then there are teachers that are not human, that may present as human for our comfort. They volunteer from these other planets and solar systems, and they come in to teach that person, because at the core, the person is not a person. The person is something much, much bigger, experiencing life as a person. So they're teaching that bigger version of us how to use that bigger gift while embodied in the human experience. And so the arena it's like a college sports field for all sorts of gifts and all sorts of talents. But then we also have other places. We have a quantum healing center, which is where my the quantum surgeon operates from. So I see it as a building because that's a very humanized way of looking at it, but it's really this energy space where people can go in and they can meet with what we'll call medical doctors, but they're not medical doctors, because that's a human title, not a galactic title. And they will help the person's intelligence reboot whatever they may be going through. So serious diagnoses and such will happen at the quantum medical center. And then we have the auditorium, which is where if I have someone who had to experience an abortion, maybe there was a medical reason for it, but their religion really conflicts with their choice, we'll take them to the auditorium to meet the soul that would have embodied the child, the baby, and the soul will explain to them how the law of the universe operates and how it does conflict with some religions. So there's this like very beautiful experience to alleviate shame or guilt in a decision, and let the person have that to reconcile their emotions by communicating with either the child, the future self of the child that will embody the future child, the future fetus, or the soul that would have occupied the fetus that chose not to occupy the fetus. So really beautiful universal messages come through when we're at the auditorium. So there's like, the campus has all these different functions at a very galactic level. And
do the messages come through you, or does your client speak to them or receive them directly, and you just facilitate the connection?
Yeah, I try not to channel unless the person's still in this kindergarten stage. And we don't go to the campus if they're in kindergarten. That the campus is like it's a college level. So, but my goal has always been to let the person have the personal experience, let the client have the personal experience, and not move it through my filters to them, for them to have the direct message from their ancestor, so they can, rather than me speaking like a translator, I would rather attune them to be able to communicate with their ancestor directly, because then they're going to understand the nuances and the subtleties that I wouldn't catch on to.
That sounds that sounds like I spoke about this last week. Actually, it sounds like another healing modality that I spoke about, where the person who's having the session actually gets their own answers, and you're just there to either ask questions and facilitate the connection. And that is, I feel like that's a purer way of doing it, because then, like you say, there's no filter. They're going through their own filter, so to speak.
It trains the brain. It trains their brain to work at that level. So we're elevating the brain activity.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
So, go ahead, Jimmy. Sorry.
There you go. That's right.
So, one question I had It just kind of popped in my mind. So, like, in these modalities, when people are confronting darker or shadow aspects, because I give you an example, when I bring people into higher dimensions,
Yeah.
One time I had a client that I brought into a shadow realm.
Yeah.
It was like everything they were hiding from themselves. And I didn't even know what it was. This was years ago. I had to pull them out. I had to go explore it myself. And it was wretched, but I think this triggers people sometimes when they encounter these darker aspects of themselves, because they have to face it and see what they're doing that's hurting other people. And I see a lot of, and I'm not talking smack, but I see a lot of spiritual people where it's like they're not confronting that shadow aspect of themselves. It reminds me of one of my mentors, Tim, when I was younger, very advanced. And Tim at one point was walking down his hall and he saw this horrific thing in front of him. And so he called my former teacher, Rossi, and was like, what is this? And she's like, that's your shadow.
It's you.
You need to embrace it. You need to embrace it. And he's like, he goes to this day, even I did it, but he's like, the hairs just stand up on my arm. Yeah. I think we're missing part. I don't know about that, but we're missing part of that confrontation of ourselves.
It's hard. It's scary for a lot of people. That's scary. Yeah. That's why I lead always with the assumption that what's happening around me is helping me in some way. So I always ask, who or what are you? As if I were an investigator. We're going in, we're going to talk to that shadow. Who or what are you? Where did you come from? How long have you been here? And how are you helping me? And then we find, oh, I'm bringing fear so that you don't progress too much, because that could be dangerous. Or I'm bringing protection because these things happen in our past. And when we start to just investigate, we find that things are not so scary. They're just maybe we misunderstood them, we confused them. Like I had a client had this dark cloud following her, and she was very scared of it. And then we confronted it, and it was a tear cloud. It was like, oh, you can't process emotions. I'm just going to keep collecting your tears for you until you have time to rain your tears. And so it just kept following her and getting darker and following her and getting darker. And it was her tears, it was her sadness, her grief, her sorrow collecting until it was safe to rain. And we wouldn't know that if we didn't have those conversations. And now we have a lot more compassion for that cloud that's following us. Guy, come on. It breaks down, and it makes, when we really ask curious questions, we're not carrying the weight of the world anymore. We're starting to understand what we are experiencing in a very different way.
Yeah, totally. And I know you've said, well, we've talked just before we came on about merging the two between like the science and the metaphysical and trying to get them both together. How do you feel? How are you doing that to start with, and also how do you feel is the best way to do that is?
Right now, my focus is on understanding the impact of emotions on the body. So the dis-ease, the disorders, what is the body telling us from being in a chronic state? What were the emotional impact? So I'm connecting it back to the medical side. I'm also connecting back to the mental health side of if we're experiencing these diseases and disorders of the mind, what caused them? And let's start to tell that story. So we're bringing the history in, and we're doing that through the basic psychological approaches, neuroscience. How does the brain work? How does the brain shift when there's trauma? And is it presenting as something that we're mistaking for a metaphysical experience, but it's really a mental experience caused by energetic overwhelm? So neuroscience, epigenetics, psychology are my big connectors in telling the story, but also teaching people how to feel their energy field. most of us have never done that. Most of us, growing up, no one ever said, okay, we're going to start feeling these layers outside of our body. Most of us grew up in a religious place where the soul resided as this like 3-ounce thing in our body. It was this little thing, not that we are an energy system with a human in the center. So I also raise people's vibration so they can feel it themselves, the layers. So long answer to say through experience.
Okay. And just regards to that, like bridging the two, and this question for you as well, Thomas, actually, because I know obviously you talk about Atlantis and everything like that. Do you feel like in history, have you ever come across instances where there has been a merging of the two? Maybe say you've seen it in a past life that you had, or you've read it in some ancient text where there is evidence that the two have been merged, and science and the metaphysical aspect that are able to work together rather than sort of separate, which is what they seem to be at the moment, or at least in shall we say general education.
I've read books, but I haven't experienced anything firsthand. Thomas, you're going to have more examples to share.
Well, I think in Atlantis we were kind of a-holes, but that took time. We started out as a perfect society. It just, people got a lot of power, and power can make people a little corrupt when they get a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And what I saw, and what I feel the world needs on some level, is that, people say light workers, dark workers. It's sometimes a matter of perspective. Yeah, there's people out there hurting people, obviously, and helping people. But at the same time, I kind of believe that teachers come to people when they need them, regardless of where they're at. It's like that's the right person for them at that time. But what I'm getting at is, like, I feel, maybe I'm just kind of shifting the question a little bit. Still, it's like, if the world's going to survive, this is what I hear, is that there's going to have to be, like, different people, I guess I'm saying that word, different people that have to come together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the weather, regardless of what they are. But if the world's going to survive, that's part of the continuum of it. And what I see is so many fractured things. That's what I saw in Atlantis towards the end. So when I was the high priest of whatever I was, that there were so many fractured components. And I'm like, guys, we're about to drown.
Yeah.
Like, we've known this for 30 years. Like, can we get this together here? Like, we got escape plans, but can we get this together? Because you guys just keep fighting with each other. And I feel like karmically, these things keep repeating in cycles of lifetimes, even as Edgar Cayce, because I love Edgar Cayce. I've read so many books when I've talked to him. So the thing is that it's like one family spent 10,000 years reincarnating just to get along with each other. That was our whole life lesson.
That's a long lesson.
Why do you think people don't come together or aren't coming together?
Trauma.
Mm.
Yeah.
Even if we look at trauma, one of the things that I have is what I call special event topics. We've been doing this for about a year, where before people would come up and they would just say, hey, this is what's going on in my life. But then I started setting the topics, and it was, I want to understand anger at the metaphysical level. I want to understand grief at the metaphysical level. Then we got to ego, and I wanted to understand ego at the metaphysical level. And what I was not expecting to find, I was looking at it from more of a negative perspective, that ego is this bad thing. But in the metaphysical arena, when our ego is really strong, we can go into those higher levels of consciousness and do a lot more without greed, without insecurity, without these negative outcomes. It's when we have an unstable ego structure that, as we build up, like Jenga, as we go up we build up another layer, it starts to get really wobbly, like a skyscraper that's not structured to handle or withstand the storm or hurricane, it gets very wobbly and we get very distorted information. But if our ego is clean, we get really beautiful experiences. And I think with Atlantis, humanity wasn't seasoned to do the things that it could do at the time. And so we had this we'll call younger generation coming in, mimicking the elders, but they didn't have the wisdom to strengthen their ego first. And that's where the greed really got out of control, with greed and corruption and imbalance. And that's what we're seeing here today in our society. We have immature people leading, and it's creating flocks of immature people rather than elders leading and forcing the next generation to level up. We're not asking people to level up and become more mature. We are promoting immaturity, and that leads to devastation.
Would you say that I may have this wrong, but would you say that sort of humbleness is also is kind of like the balance for the ego, as sort of is part of the ego, but it is what's necessary to balance the ego, to strengthen the ego, because then it can be more, like you say, it can be more sort of I don't know, pure, I suppose, but is that humbleness?
Yeah, I think humbleness is a part of the recipe. When we stop making decisions for the betterment of everyone, and we start making decisions for the betterment of ourselves, is when we are out of balance, because we are not meant to be on our own. We're not meant to be solo creatures. We're pack animals. We're meant to be in villages and tribes and groups. We thrive. Our whole when we look at oxytocin and dopamine and endorphins and what's that fourth cocktail? Dopamine, endorphins, serotonin. When we look at those natural antidepressants within us, they all come from group and collective interaction. So when we stop thinking about what is the betterment of the whole group, we then start poisoning ourselves, because we're not giving ourselves the very vitamin we need to strengthen our own species. We break it down, and then it takes away from the strength of the healthiness of our ego, and it puts us into the destructive state.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Makes sense.
I think it's just, yeah, I've seen the spiritual culture working in stores, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever app it was, and in person, spiritual events that I've gone to I've been doing this for a while, that there's so many people fighting with each other. Mm-hmm. Like it's always like a piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. And I feel like people would get along, like people would be so much better, as I've stated earlier, if people were to check that, and I hate to use the word ego, but because I like the word ego. I was always taught the ego is very important. So
physically it is.
Yeah, like I was taught you could walk without it. You would just walk into traffic. You wouldn't even know what a car is. So you just walk into traffic and kaboom, you'd be out. But it's so much, and I feel like we keep repeating these lessons through lifetime to lifetime, where it's like, can we get these idiots? I'm gonna say, because I'm channeling a little bit. Can we get these idiots to actually work together for once?
Who's the alpha leader?
That is the key. I think there's probably 10 to 15 to 20 floating around.
If you were to ask any one person, especially one that is struggling with communication, who the alpha leader is, who's the alpha leader in their world, in their family, in their neighborhood, in their country, who's the alpha leaders of our planet? And are those alpha leaders coming from a mature elder space, or are they immature people that are leading immature people?
Yeah, and are they making cults? That's my biggest thing. I've had past lifetimes where I've made cults and other things. And we all have light and dark lifetimes, neutral ones. But that's like my thing moving forward is like I don't want to form a cult. But
No.
the thing is, you have to be an example for people at the same time, but you can't force them like it's the army or any of these other organizations. Like you have to serve one person. It's like politics. I don't get into politics, but it's like you give people, it's tribalism. You give them two options, they choose. You do this with everything almost. You know, good and evil, this and this, black and white. And it's tribalism. Everything comes down to tribalism when it comes down to people. And I don't think people realize that I hate the word the matrix, but they say the matrix, everyone's in the matrix, but I'm like this, the very foundations of what you're watching and consuming is pushing you back into the very thing that you think you're fighting against, being that matrix, using quotation. So I see this a lot. I'm always studying patterns. I love patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that?
That's
I know it's a lot.
That was a lot. Like, ooh, I think I have to break that down. I want to go back to the alpha leader, because whether we are energy practitioners in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, or 60s, we all need healthy people to emulate and mirror, whether they align 100% with what we do. We need people to reflect back something we haven't learned yet. And are we, viewers, hosts, are we willing to step up and say, I am willing, that are we willing to vow to ourselves that we're going to evolve and stay on the path of evolution with ourselves so that we can be someone that somebody else looks up to, that somebody else mirrors? Are we, and if each of us did it and everyone watching right now did that, how we elevate an entire species, we elevate humanity by seeking someone that knows something that we don't know yet, learning from them, whether it aligns with us 100% or not, we gain from them. And if each of us is doing that, naturally there will be alpha leaders that surface, that have wisdom and maturity, and it brings the society up.
Do you think we have to do that intentionally or consciously, or do you think we are doing it sort of unconsciously, if you like, whether we know it or not?
Oh, I mean, cults would not exist if it was conscious awareness of manipulation. It's subtle manipulation of small choices over a long period of time that bring cults to the strength that they have.
So do you think that everything is a benefit for someone, even if they're not aware of it, or even if other people don't think so either? Because in that instance, then everything that we do, whether we know it or not, is for our benefit. So it's almost as if we naturally evolve, whether we think we're doing it or not, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, there's a term called metaphysical optimism, and it looks at the conscious ability to alter the natural evolution of the human race. So humans are going to evolve on their own, but do we have the ability to infuse metaphysical optimism to raise the consciousness in a positive light, to speed up the evolution, to reduce the suffering a little bit faster as an entire collective of humanity?
Because I guess, well, I just had a thought. I don't know how accurate it is, but the way that we individually say, well, going back to what we were talking about at the start, how we go through trauma and experience all of these different things, and that sort of is can be the catalyst for an awakening or an awareness or whatever. Then you could almost say that you could see how, even though it may seem like a bad experience at the time, it was actually a benefit for us. But then like Thomas says about the state of the world, you can see collectively that the state of the world is going through a traumatic experience, but ultimately it's going to be for our benefit.
Yeah, I mean, we all experienced the pandemic. That was a global trauma.
Mm.
It was a global trauma with no definitive expiration date. It wasn't like a hurricane was on this date, ended on this date, like Hurricane Katrina and those that experienced that, or a tsunami. The pandemic had no formal expiration date. So we all went through a global trauma. We experienced fear, unknown, uncertainty, and there was no, okay, now we all shake it off. There was, we just sort of moved forward without thinking about it even being a trauma. So talk about sort of subconscious, unconscious behavior. We all witnessed it globally. When we are in trauma, unless we see people who've walked out of trauma, we don't know that we're even in trauma. Which is why, like, programs like AA for alcoholics, you show up and you see other people that are recently stepping out of addiction. But when you're in addiction, it's really hard to admit you're an addict. It's not until you step out and you see other people admitting that they're an addict. They're reflecting the next step. And so when we get people who go through the program and they're 5 years sober, 10 years sober, they're then becoming the role models for the people who are a few years less sober. Or, you know, people who have a 30-day coin become the role models for the people who are in day one. And that's how we have to move forward.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked into the work? This is kind of off topic, but Katie Byron.
I'm familiar with Katie Byron. I don't know that I have any books.
I'm getting that for you because they keep repeating it, so I just had to say it. So, like, just her origin story of how she got into all this is very interesting from a psychology perspective. She was like locked in her room for like years, and then one day, I'm making it short, she just had this epiphany, and it just woke her up to whatever. And then it took her years to figure out, because she turned into a totally different person, like overnight. And there was no like prayer or anything. It just happened. And she took her years to figure out how to teach it. But I've read a lot of Katie Byron, especially in the beginning of my path. And I found it very fascinating, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I'll purchase some of the books. I'll look into it.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned earlier about the pieces of us. Oversight. Do you have a sort of a structure, or are you aware of the different, how many pieces there are of us? Do you know over soul, higher self, or whatever? I know it's a bit funny question, but I was just curious because, you know, you see, you hear and see people saying, oh yeah, it's this and this and this, and then this is above this, and then we're above that, and I was just, I don't know, I just wanted to get your sort of take on it, whether you'd been shown anything, you know.
I think we have to look at it like a crayon. When we're in kindergarten, we get an 8-pack of crayons.
Right.
You pretty much get like your 3 primary, maybe 3 secondary, and your black and your white. And that's good enough at kindergarten. So at kindergarten, we have a mind, we have a body, we have a soul, or spirit, depending on, you know, belief systems change the third attribute. But then as we step deeper into metaphysics, our crayon pack gets larger. And now we have maybe 16 crayons instead of 8. And then we have 32, and then we have then we get the 248 pack of crayons. The deeper we get away from the core of the physical, the more pieces come in, but they're not so important for kindergartners. For new people coming in, I would overwhelm people to talk about what happens at the 118th layer of our energy field and how that is so very different than the third layer, which is able to process emotions. You know, 1, 2, 3, about a little bit over a foot away from our body. We can go and go and go. We can fill an entire auditorium of the pieces of us, but it doesn't really serve someone who's beginning their journey and doesn't need to know all of that. So the answer is, let's stick with 8 crayons. Let's draw with that first, and then when we're comfortable with 8, we'll double our crayons.
Okay, fair enough. Any more questions, Thomas?
No, I think we're good. I got to keep it at a certain level so I can get through AI. They only give me so many credits.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no worries. And have you got? And do you want to just remind us where we can reach you? If have you got any courses or anything that you want to sort of tell us about, or any classes or anything like that? Just feel free to sort of shout out wherever you want.
Awesome. So I do TikTok live demos. We do either special event topics, or I'm like, hey, let's go take a look at your ego pattern, or we do what I call wild card. Wild card is the person comes up, I step into their body, I overlay to see if there's any trauma sitting in the body, and then we start journeying. We start going to the black room or the campus. So that would be the beginner for someone new to my work. The class, I have a class on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. It's a group, and they travel together each week. And new people can come in the first Sunday of the month, Sundays at 10 or 10 Pacific. And they're working together to develop their clairs as a team. And in doing so, they're also healing themselves at the metaphysical levels. So they're journeying, we're going to the black room together, we're going on an adventure together. And then they're learning how to use their clairs better and identify parts, because we can each hold a mirror to each other, hold a mirror for each other to see what we can't see in our blind spots. So I would love to have more people in my Sunday group every week. I also have, I've been talking a lot on my TikTok channel about psychology. So if people are ready to put one foot in that pool of psychology and metaphysics to learn how the two go together, I'm on TikTok live frequently. I would love to see some new folks joining and just listening and learning for free.
Excellent. Sounds good.
So they can find you one Emprima TikTok channel, correct?
Yeah, I think it's on TikTok. I'm one.emprima, ONE.emprima, where the website doesn't have a dot.
You guys can see it right there at the bottom. So just throw a dot in there. Yeah. So it was great having you on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Thomas, you got any classes? You normally have one on Sunday night?
This Sunday, I'm going to be taking people to the Akashic Record. Then I'm giving people with the code SUMMER, capital S, on that when they check out, 50 off all services. I've been doing loads of mentorship packages lately. That seems to be the main thing I've been doing.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Right. Thank you both. Thank you everyone for watching. And we'll see you all next week. Au revoir.